The year is 1347, the Black Plague is sweeping throughout most of Europe while the 100 Years' War rages on with no sign of either slowing down. Which mighty nation will begin their dominion in these dark times? That's the question brand new real-time strategy game The Plague Kingdom Wars poses to you. Developed by Reverie Worldwide Studios and available from tomorrow on Steam, does the follow-up to medieval Kingdom Wars adequately deal with this major historical time of conflict, or is it merely plaguing the Steam library with another cookie-cutter RTS game? Find out right now with me on my impressions of The Plague Kingdom Wars. As soon as I installed the game, I was struck by the dark and macabre nature of the tapestry art style during loading screens and menus. From the innumerate skulls and corpses to the weaponry and general dark depiction of the era, everything feels on brand for the time period it's targeting. For any non-historian gamers out there, this game takes place somewhere between Assassin's Creed 1 and Assassin's Creed 2, if that helps. To get it out of the way, I did receive a free Steam key from developer Reverie Studios, so thank you very much for that. With that in mind though, I will try to give as unbiased a review as possible, so on with the review. Starting your campaign for European Dominion, the game has an impressive multitude of faction options to choose from. Whatever culture you're interested in, there should be something there for you. Quoting the developer's description, they say, quote, "Be a minor noble in Ottoman's court, an earl in Ireland, or the Emperor of Byzantium, and rewrite history by fighting to preserve your empire and prevent the spread of the Black Death across Europe. With your faction chosen, you will be introduced to the overworld campaign map spanning Europe, Byzantium, North Africa, and more." It's impressive how much land the game manages to cover. Geography aside, the game is visually impressive on this map, where scale takes precedent over detail. Colourful grasslands lead to mountainscapes and on to rivers and oceans, all changing with the seasons as you progress through the game's timeline. Green grass fades to orange with the passage of time and is eventually covered by snow, so the game always stays visually interesting while watching the dynamics change. Not just a nice visual touch, these weather changes will affect supply chains and trade. Camera movement can feel a little bit awkward however, and it always seemed to move a little further than I wanted it to, and the zoom in feature isn't quite as comprehensive as you might like, but nothing that ruins the experience. As with all real-time strategy games, your humble beginnings can be a little bit overwhelming as you take your first steps in building an empire. However, thankfully the game has a helpful steward or advisor who will help and give regular advice on how to expand and what supplies you need to focus on, and once you're a bit more comfortable with the game's economy, you can turn this advisor on and off at will, so it's never cumbersome. On the campaign map, you will take part in diplomacy or conflict, though in comparison to its competitors, the diplomacy is currently limited and the emphasis is definitely on battle to increase your standing. Tracking your own and your rivaling nations' military movements, and of course trying to avoid your cities and hamlets falling to the spread of Black Plague. There's a lot of ground to explore here, but your expansion is done with a deliberate and easy to manage pace, so you shouldn't lose track of what territories you own or where your armies are too easy. Your movements, or turns as most games would handle it, are completely unrestricted on the campaign map. You can recruit soldiers for each of your armies and begin to move them throughout the world. The animations for army movement are a little bit stiff. It was a bit lackluster as well to see that switching units between armies is done entirely on checkerboard menus rather than seeing units move between battalions in real time on the map, but a minor gripe in a system that otherwise works very well on an interface that's very easy to get to grips with. Time passes freely and supplies to run your towns and armies will dwindle, so you need to be active in your search for new territories and new supply chains, ensuring that each of your locations are providing enough food, stone, wood and silver to meet your population's demands, or you'll run the risk of a low food supply chain leading to civil unrest and famine, which then may in turn stop you being able to access particular towns wherein the population are not happy with you. If you've managed to keep your citizens happy, you can enter each town at will to take a more active approach in their development. From inside the city walls you will see any location's potential for expansion. Smaller locations have fewer building sites and less fortifications, but this can all be manually upgraded. You'll be tasked with building farms to supply your population with food, lumber camps to ensure that you have enough wood to continue your expansion, stone and silver mines allow you to build stone walls or new military technology, and each building type has several levels of upgrading to do to increase their yield and speed things along. Watching a small hamlet grow into a large city has an extremely addictive quality, helped along by the brilliant sound design of the game, the clanging of metal or swing of wood actively accompanying each new building's development. The music of the game also seems period appropriate and is even a little bit akin to something like The Witcher, which is no bad thing. The 100 Years' War, as the name suggests, was a time of extreme and constant military conflict, and true to the period, when your attempts at diplomacy fail, you will find yourself in near constant battles, whether it's attacking your neighbouring kingdom or fending off a siege on one of your own outposts. Battles take place on the same smaller style maps used when building, which actually adds to the tension because there's nothing like spending 45 minutes growing attached to your newly upgraded town that you built yourself, choosing the location of each building and fortification carefully, only to watch an army march in and try to claim it for themselves. The battle system in the Plague Kingdom Wars is pretty impressive and fun to get to grips with, while the elements of strategy and AI doesn't seem to be as polished as something like the Total War series, and some camera features aren't as impressive, and again, the zoom doesn't get quite as close to the action as I would like it to have done. But given its small development team, this can be easily forgiven, and it doesn't make battles feel any less brutal or visceral. Your fallen foes will leave behind blood trails and corpses, and this can lead to a crimson mess when you overrun their cities and litter it with their bodies. Resource management adds to the survival feel of a game taking place during the pandemic. Unique to this game, when running out of supplies during battle, you don't experience attrition and start to lose units. Rather, the game takes you back out of the action as you can no longer sustain your war effort. I'm not sure how I feel about this decision in development, as I think a game set during the Plague could have had a few more interesting outcomes to contend with, like if you aren't well fortified, the Plague could find its way into your ranks during battle, or famine if you aren't producing enough food during battle. It's a little bit jarring to just be taken out of the action. In battle, units behave how you would expect. Each of your units will have a rock, paper, scissors style strengths and weaknesses, depending on who they are engaged with. Cavalry on horseback will run right through regular swordsmen but have a hard time facing enemies with longer ranged pikes. Regular civilian style militia will be overrun by macemen, and so on. One potential flaw I was encountered with was the game's archers. In these sorts of games I always like to have a large supply of long ranged attacker, but it did feel like I was a bit overpowered as a result in this game. Standing outside an enemy's battlements and having my army of archers litter the sky with arrows was enough to empty almost every city I besieged before sending in my foot soldiers to clean up the remaining survivors. In saying that though, it didn't take away from the fun of the activity. I thoroughly enjoyed watching my long-range armies rain fiery death on my enemies from afar. Battles can range anywhere from 15 minutes to almost an hour depending on your playstyle, but can be auto-resolved from the campaign screen if you don't quite have the time for something as long as that, which can be helpful as long as you have a relative statistical advantage over the enemy. You will usually suffer more casualties this way, however, so it does pay to be a bit more hands-on. The pathfinding during battles for the AI is actually much better than I assumed it would be, with troops rarely getting stuck or lost and always taking the most logical and sensible path to their objective, which some games do get wrong, so I was very happy to see that with this game. The overall presentation of the game is very strong throughout, with well narrated introductions on the campaign mode and solid voice acting when selecting your units. The only gripe I had is that after 15 or so hours in the campaign, hearing the same phrases repeated over and over again each time you select a unit can be a little bit overwhelming, but an understandable flaw in an otherwise polished game. The game ran fairly well on my PC on medium settings, but I did encounter some stuttering, especially when two large armies were meeting on the battlefield. But I don't have the greatest PC in the world, so this may have been something on my end, and wasn't too much of a plague. I have ran higher spec games on my PC with less issues, however, so it's hard to tell exactly where the fault lay just yet. Given that the game was developed by a small 3-man team, the effort here is actually very impressive, and looking at their Steam community pages, they are very active in listening to and implementing feedback, and have also posted a timeline for further updates and improvements to the game yet to take place. So any faults may yet be ironed out, and it is one that's going to be worth keeping your eye on, with plenty to look forward to. Having played my Irish campaign to the point that I had united Ireland under my iron fist, I still had not encountered the Plague, which actually makes real sense, given that we are a western island and the Plague moved in from the east. So to give the mechanic a fair shake, I started a new campaign as the Golden Horde this time, an eastern clan descended from Genghis Khan, and was almost immediately having to deal with plague outbreaks in my new hamlets. It adds an extra layer of urgency to the game and was a welcome fresh outlook on the genre, especially as I had now gotten to grips with the controls. You will have to decide on quarantining your cities or culling some of your civilians to slow the plague, burning their corpses or even banishing them from your lands, all of which can lead to a civil unrest while trying to grow your empire or dealing with enemy factions. It's a fun and interesting mechanic, and with the promise of a zombie mode DLC launching soon in the game, which spawns your plague-dead citizens as a zombie horde, I will definitely be keeping my eye on that to see how it turns out. Outside of the main campaign, which has a fairly lengthy set of goals to finish, you can customize and take part in smaller skirmishes. In skirmish mode, you can set the victory conditions and difficulty, time limits and resources. Skirmish mode can be a nice way to practice battles and building, as you start with your own outpost outside an enemy territory if you're attacking or you're defending a city. It's a good way to learn the controls, figure out your inventory and supply management, while also learning a more offensive attacking style. With the separate campaign maps, battle maps and town management, the game falls somewhere between a Total War style game and the old Age of Empires series, which puts it in very good company if you ask me. I'm not sure it will go down quite as classic as those games and doesn't handle some of the genre's mainstay components as well as its AAA competitors, but for a small development team it is quite the achievement, and it does enough to differentiate itself from the crowd given that it has its macabre setting and plague mechanic, and I think it's worth picking up. I give The Plague Kingdom Wars a solid 7.5 cones out of 10. Certainly worth giving it a shot if you're a fan of the genre, or like me, just enjoy dark, macabre settings in your games, especially if you've gone through some of the more well-known games in the genre and are still looking for a new spin on things. The game launches tomorrow, the 9th of July on Steam to the general public, and I recommend it if you enjoy this sort of game. Thanks for making it this far. Thanks again to Reverie World Studios for the key. Please hit like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel for more MrConeman content, try not to catch the Black Plague, and stay safe.